Welcome back to the stage, Jamie Redford. So I'll mention that Jamie and I talked it's been a week and a half ago or so. So I know you may have something to say, some questions to ask. So that's what those microphones are for. I'll get the ball rolling, but feel free to stand up and ask questions at any time. I guess, Jamie, I wanted to ask, if you were to identify what you think is the main obstacle to getting us to the point where this is a reality, do you see it as, is it about business interests? Is it about greed or economics? Well, it's not about economics. Is it about culture? Like, what is the thing that's most resistant to change as you think about this?
Well, I think you have to have the economics on your side. You have to be able to win the economic argument. And it's really, it seems to me it's just right at that tipping point. I mean, there's a number of places in this country right now where wind is the most affordable form of electricity. And that's all happened in the last few years. So the economics have to be there. But there's also, cultural myths or misconceptions or just stubborn sort of resistance to old notions of what renewable energy is. That's still very much out there. So it's a mix between that and sort of long-standing cultural notions of what clean energy is and who's behind it. And then secondly, you do need, you need some good politicians. And when I started making this film, I was hoping you didn't. And then I saw what a poor political process does, but then I saw what happens when people respond to their constituents and deal. And so, what happened in Nevada is a good example of the political process, but it's the same time, it really shouldn't boomerang like that. Yeah. We shouldn't have to go through something like that. So it's really all three in my mind. But I mean, the bottom line is the economics are there and it's exploding. I mean, 10 years ago, there were 2,000 electric cars on the road, and there's going to be 1.3 million next year, and the next million are coming the following year. And if you look at everything with wind and solar, and even now storage technology, it's all just like that.
One of the questions that came up in your conversation with the former Secretary of the Navy was, will the political process now, there's a Republican in the White House, Donald Trump, how is that going to change the momentum? Did you get a sense of how that might?
Yeah, so I'm sure there are people people working in the clean energy industry and particularly in policy in this room that know more about this than I do. But my understanding is just the last, as this new tax legislation is working its way through the system, that some important things for clean energy seem like they're going to survive as of today. We'll see about next week. But so, in spite of all the bluster, the Department of Defense has continued to embrace renewable energy as a strategic advantage. Mattis himself believes and states a belief in climate science. So, in spite of what goes on in the Twitter sphere, and it's not good. I mean, I think the continuing emphasis, I think Scott Pruitt and everything he's doing at the EPA is just almost unfathomable. And yet, at the state level, things are continuing to move forward. So my hope is that, as the wheel turns at the state level, the folks in Nevada that run for state, that are state assemblymen, state senators, they come up and they end up running for Congress and the Senate. I mean, it's like a class. They come up, and I think you'll see over the next 10 years that this issue of renewable energy is not going to be stuck in this divide that we're seeing right now.
Go ahead. Yes.
I was very happy to see what we had heard in terms of rumors, what had happened in Nevada, because we saw that as like a rolling thunder coming our way, that, oh no, another thing going down the tubes. You know, we've suffered so much in Utah and the South with Bears Ears and other issues going on and nationally, politically. But in terms of the solar area, what had happened in Nevada just sounded like, oh no, it's going to happen here in Utah too. And it was really wonderful in a much bigger sense to show that there was a positive flip to that, a change to that. And I felt excited that people realized that we could overturn this destruction. And we've had enough in 11 months here that if on this area alone, if we can continue to fight and work and people get involved, we can flip this back around. And I want to thank you for showing that. That was tremendous. And it's one little kernel of good news.
In spite of my, fondness for the state, I only have like a glancing awareness of what's been going on with Rocky Mountain Power. But my sense is that there was much more of a dialogue in Utah than in Nevada, and that it's an interesting thing because what you saw in Nevada is it swung way over here, where the Utilities Commission was really, and there was a lot of acrimony and bitterness on both sides on the discussion about net metering. And so there was this punitive policy, and then it swung back the other way. And as I said, it's really unnecessary. It's really too bad when that happens. And I remember being at a Utah Clean Energy event, I don't know, last year or 2 years ago, and sort of speaking to some people and saying, boy, I hope Rocky Mountain Power figures out a different way to deal with this. And I think my sense is that there's been a little bit more dialogue going on in Utah than there was in Nevada, but maybe I'm sure some of you will enlighten me after the...
Yeah, you might get enlightened here in a moment. Yes.
I have, in all of the debates, I've never heard anybody, somebody may have, but I've never heard anybody talk about the amount of human lives that have been lost in the production of coal and oil and gas and even the accidents that happen in people's homes. In Salt Lake City, we had, some home blew up and killed a mother while her husband and daughter were waiting out on the sidewalk for her. And compared to how many people have died in the creation of renewable energy, I've never seen that.
Have there been no beheadings on windmills?
But I've never seen, to me, you've got, millions on one side, and I've never, ever heard that be presented as part of the argument, the amount of death and disability that is due directly to the production and the use of non-renewables compared to renewables.
Mm-hmm. Well,
can I throw into the mix just the question that we also talked about on the show, the conversation with the military person that it's safer to use renewables just as a security measure.
Yeah.
Well, in a number of different ways. And that's why they're interested in developing storage as well so that they're not tied into the grid. But I think, what you're describing, I've always felt like the health argument is a really strong argument. And in the 70s, when we first started developing renewable energy, it was a health issue. That was before the science around climate change was just beginning the barest whispers at that point. And the problems with particulate matter, all these noxious gases from emissions was really driving it, and it seemed to be enough at that time. So then a bigger, more profound problem came along. And sometimes I wonder, I just wonder, I think there just seems to be some people that the problem with climate change is just so big, they go into denial. And we should remember, as you're saying, that fossil fuels take a huge toll on our health, on everybody's health.
But the particulate matter is squishy for a lot of people. But saying these many coal miners died, numbers of it's vast.
Yeah.
In the history of production of fossil fuel, the deaths, that's hard data.
Yeah.
And the deaths,
There's a wonderful
how many
film
people
called
have died because of solar or wind power compared to all these real dead people? You can't argue with that. And I've never heard that as as a presentation of why we should make this change. I just think that would be a good thing.
You're mentioning a film that you...
I think it's called Beyond the Ashes. Looks at coal, if you're interested in this. Anyway.
People with lives.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I had, well, one is I'm really concerned about climate change. And I think probably the worst thing that we do is burn coal. Natural gas, maybe not so bad. Of course, we burn a lot of fuel in our cars. And we got the refineries here, too, to deal with that. And I'm one of the people that drive a car quite a bit. But maybe next one I'm looking at buying would be something like a Chevy Bolt, you know. But one of the problems, you know, you went to that server farm and they said they were completely renewable. And I would say they're probably not completely renewable. They're paying to buy renewable energy and they're getting it off the grid and they're getting energy from the grid. Which some of which is probably coal, some of which is probably hydro. Hydro's clean. I haven't got too much problem with hydro other than the fact that somewhere where they built the big dams is probably not the best thing. And so you get the problem with storage. I got to say, when I was a teenager, I worked on one of these plants that you showed in your film, and you didn't really talk about the storage part of that. I worked at Niagara Power on the power plant there at Niagara Falls. They had a big storage facility because they would only let them take so much water during the day, and then they would take more water at night, and they'd put it in this big storage pond. They'd pump it uphill about 80 feet, and then they would drop it back down the 80 feet, and then they'd drop it another about 300, I don't know the exact number anymore, about 300 feet down to generate power. So that was kind of interesting. But you had somebody that spoke out against nuclear power, and I guess I would speak in favor of some of the new technologies coming. There's one company called NuScale that's making modular nuclear plants, and I think they're going to build 12 of these 50 megawatt plants. They'll go in at Idaho National Labs land, and it's actually a Utah Rural Power Association, I think, that's doing that. They're waiting, I think, for probably it'll happen within the next 2 years. They'll start that. And the other one is TerraPower. Do you know about TerraPower? So that's the.
You have a question?
Well, yeah, I just wanted to ask him if this sort of stuff, he's, talked about this, do you know about the TerraPower? People worry about.
Do you know about TerraPower? Why don't you answer the one about nuclear?
So,
what do you think is that come up?
No, nuclear, I honestly, so I was at an event on Sunday in San Francisco. There were 21 kids from all around the country that have come together to file a lawsuit against the federal government over climate inaction. And it was really, really inspiring to spend an afternoon listening to these kids talk, and each one of them explained why they were doing this, and the reasons were many. And I was there in the company of the Environmental Forum of Marin County, which is my home county. And we were driving back, and I was sitting in the back seat and listening to this long conversation about nuclear. And one of the guys was pro-nuclear, and one of the guys was on the edge. And it was really interesting to me and one of them was with the Citizens Climate Lobby. So, it's an interesting question. There are some really smart people. If you didn't see Pandora's Promise, it's a documentary that looks at the promise of nuclear. But here's what I would say. I don't support nuclear as of now because I'm willing to live next to a windmill. I'm willing to live next to a solar farm. I might even live next to a gas plant, but I'm not going to live next to a nuclear power plant.
Well, I think I'd rather live next to a nuclear plant.
It's a bottom line thing. We're all in an intuitive position,
yeah.
And we're gonna have to figure out how to make it safer. And a lot of people want to do that, and part of the problem is they're not being given the room to do this sort of research to go to a different, a different evolution of nuclear. Right now, You know, there's a lot of, if you can cut down the half-life and you can store it safely, we're just not there yet, but maybe we will be.
Yes, go ahead.
My name is Carl Clark, and I want to thank you, Jim, for bringing this movie to Utah. I want to tell you that over 40 years ago, I was a state senator, and I wrote the first air pollution bill for the state of Utah personally.
Wow.
And I've been 12 years ago, I started a business called the Electric Car Company. And right now, I go to China quite often, and it's an eye-opening experience because they know what they're facing over there. The government of China will give 63% of all the money that you spend on a new car, if it's an electric car, the government pays that much. So if you have bought a $10,000 car, the government kicks in $6,300. They're also doing an awful lot of other things that are pretty eye-opening, and it makes you scared a little bit for what's going on in the United States. Now, for the sake of telling the people in this audience, most of the utilities in the western United States is owned by Berkshire Hathaway and Nevada Power, Rocky Mountain Power, and a lot of other power companies. And these power companies, they get together and talk to each other, and they're scared of solar. Years ago, they decided that there was going to be 3% of the amount of power that was going to be generated by renewables, and they didn't worry about it. But when Nevada hit 30%, they got spooked. And now there's a program going on, and they're fighting the citizens of this audience and this state right now. And if we don't wake up, we're going to end up being on the losing end there. Although Nevada did the right thing, and it's not over with yet.
No,
Anyway.
it's not. But another thing, I thank you for your comments. I want to mention that what happened in California. So in Marin County, where I live, about 10 years ago, a group of people got together and decided, why don't we have our own public utility that doesn't have to deliver profits to shareholders and just buy clean power? And if we eliminate that slice of the pie, then we could probably compete with PG&E in what we charge the Marin County residents for electricity. That was the idea. PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric, sued them repeatedly and lost repeatedly over time. And then they fought them on the PR side of things with millions of dollars of advertising budget. And this was a public utility that could not fight back with advertising dollars. They prevailed anyway, Marin Clean Energy. And today, PG&E offers something that is really similar to what Marin Clean Energy came up with. And this is something you're starting to see in many places where the push for clean energy, eventually, if people step up and start using it and they do what they can, the big boys listen. But amazingly enough, even though Marin Clean Energy provides by default 50% renewable energy to its customers, only 3% opt to pay $10 more to go 100%. And have an enormous amount of trouble getting people to do what they can do pretty easily. I mean, I don't want to make judgments about $10, but of all the things you can do, you can weigh this, and people just don't know it. They don't choose it. And I know here at Rocky Mountain Power offers clean energy alternatives as well. I don't know the details, but there are many other places where they're offering it because they don't want to be left behind, or even as a gesture of greenwashing. They offer it but don't promote it, counting on the public to stay disengaged. So if everybody that had the option could step forward and do it, you'd see a big difference, and this ball would start to roll faster. So some of this falls on just trying to get the awareness out there, and it's really hard. Yeah.
Thanks for your question. Yes.
Hi. My question is, I was pretty struck by, even though both solar panels and those massive solar farms we saw in the documentary are both technically solar power, functionally they're a lot different. So I'm kind of curious if you think that microgrids that we have with these individual solar panels are inherently a better way of distributing electricity, or if it's just kind of what we have to do in the meantime while the industrial grid catches up, and that long term it's a better idea to have an industrial grid, even if it's, as long as it's producing using renewable energy sources.
That's a tough question. I'm really a little bit out of my class trying to address that one, but I would say I don't think we're going to save our atmosphere by hoping everyone goes to microgrids and it's all fully distributed. I think you will never get there without it, but I think you've got to have a large centralized projects, a large grid-based projects. You've got to have it all. You're going to need it all. And I think probably in the next 25 years, what will happen is the economics will determine when you should be off the grid and when you should be on the grid. But I don't think it's going to be, but I think it's going to be renewable. You know, it's not going to be the natural gas and coal 25 years from now. No way.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So more or less for argument's sake.
Could you step a little closer, please? I'm
Yeah,
having a hard
absolutely.
time.
So more or less for argument's sake, it's kind of something I've always thought about when thinking about renewables. And I guess you've been around them and thinking about them quite a lot. But when you think about the resources involved in producing whatever mechanism or platform you're going to use to have renewables, when do you start to realize, or when does it come up for debate, how much power is going into producing these, to how much they eventually produce, and to where they actually become like net zero, to where all the power you put into producing these turns to actually, or now producing green power, you've made up for all the power you used to make these products, make these renewables. Has that come up as a...
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you. Can you rephrase that and speak up a little bit?
How do you kind of begin to understand all the energy that you have to put into producing renewables?
Oh, yeah.
The energy that goes into creating.
Yeah, and when do you start realizing
net zero?
When you start realizing the net zero, to know that you're now producing clean energy and all the energy put into producing that has been accounted for?
Yeah, there's a lot of resources. I mean, it takes a lot of energy to make panels, it takes a lot of energy to make wind turbines, it takes a lot of resources, it takes a lot of metals. I think it would be pretty unrealistic to think that there aren't going to be environmental costs to creating the technologies we need for clean energy. I mean, you know, at a certain point, you just hit a point where you're always going to be having an impact of some sort. And I think we really just have to be clear about, you know, making sure we don't make the most egregious mistakes. So,
And keeping,
you know, with battery technology, for instance, so a lot of people that are skipping over the current, you know, the lithium technology because they're foreseeing a long-term problem with resources and environmental impact of battery storage if you really scale that up.
Yeah.
So they're trying to come up with the next generation, and one can only hope that we get there because, you know, there are no easy answers. I mean, the best thing that could happen is there'd be about, you know, 200 billion less of us or whatever. I mean, you know, that's, you know, the real issue in my mind in the end, but it doesn't seem like that's going to happen overnight, although it might if we're not careful.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks. Yes. Yes. Go ahead.
I would just like to say, as a clean air activist for here in Utah for the
Can
last.
you get that microphone just a little? I'm so sorry. There you go.
Thank you. How's that?
Yeah.
As a clean air activist for the last 5 years, and also rooftop solar, and now selling residential rooftop solar for over a year now, I think that, and all the sustainability people that I work with, microgrids are happening in Utah, not as fast as we'd like them to. Salt Lake City's public safety building is a net zero building, although it's not powered on site. So the capability and the intelligence and the people who know how to do it are here in the state of Utah. And we need to get more public awareness of doing, which I sell to all my clients, all the workarounds to have a distributed energy resource as your home and battery storage to put you in a position to be grid tied but off grid and only paying the smallest amount of money you can possibly pay to Rocky Mountain Power. That will get their attention.
Yes.
I think that actually ties into my question. One of the challenges, if everybody goes to net zero, then there will be no money to support the grid. And so if people are actually want to use the grid in order to have power at night or whatever, I mean, you can't run a utility with zero income. So I think part of what's needed is a different billing, that you don't pay Rocky Mountain just for the energy that you use, and that energy, you use over the period of a month or whatever, but you have to pay for like maybe your peak energy usage also, something like that. And in order for that to happen, there has to be like smart meters. But a lot of people don't like smart meters, so I don't really understand exactly why. But I wonder whether, especially smart metering, if you encounter discussion of smart meters.
Well, from what I know about smart meters, apparently there's concern about electromagnetic radiation. And yet we walk around with phones in our armpits all day long. So it's sort of it's weird. It's interesting, like what we choose to stress out about. So I really don't have a very educated answer for you or comment on that, other than the whole idea of the smart grid. With cloud technology, there's so many concurrent leaps in technology that are happening along with the clean technology that's going to make our ability to monitor usage, store it when it's cheap, use it when it's expensive, the economics of when it's expensive, when it's not, when you can store, when it's better to store than to use, all that. It's like a communication between technologies that's rapidly unfolding right now. Oracle bought a company called O-Power that's basically just positioned to smarten up the grid and for the sake of utilities so that they can have an economic future. I mean, it would be a bummer to work. I think it would be a real drag to work at a utility right now. It would just be a drag, because things are, you're going to have to change, and if you you can either change or you can fight it. And what a terrible thing to have to try to resist inevitability. So the more we can help utilities continue their greedy profits, and I'm kidding, but kind of. And I think you have to have some of that, practically speaking. That's just at least where I'm coming from.
Let me ask you this finally, Jamie. You mentioned in the film, you say this at a moment of exasperation, that you can't innovate your way out of the bullshit that you witnessed there in Nevada. Yeah. And then it comes up again, it's almost a theme. Change doesn't just happen. These kinds of situations can't create change unless there's action. Would you say something about that finally? Because it seems like that's kind of an idea that you keep coming back to, that this is going to require still. It's not just economics, it's got to be action too.
People ask me, what's it like to make documentary films? And one of the lucky things for me, I can look back now and see it looking back, is that I've chosen either unconsciously or otherwise to focus on stories that feature good people doing good things. And maybe it's for my own psychological well-being, my own need to connect to that part of us. Lord knows there's enough. And I've done the other ones. I've made a few documentaries that pointed out just absolutely bleak situations about the darker parts of us. But what I see is the further away. I see Washington D.C. as this sort of crystallization of our worst selves, and that when you look in your own community, starting in your own city, in your own town, and you start there, you'll see a lot of these divides don't hold up. And I saw that as I traveled the country and visiting with people. Some of the folks I talked to, I didn't make a point of pointing it out, but there were conservatives in there that I didn't even point out. It's work. It can work. And I think what we have to do is just continue to work together and push upwards, because I don't think anything's going to happen up there until it comes from here. But I think it's happening. So, happening.
Hey! Thank you very much, Jamie Redford.
Thank you all for
Thank you all
coming
for
out.
coming. Thanks a
Appreciate
lot.
it.